The folder landed on the glass table at 11:47 p.m., and Marcus Cole stood over it like a man staring into his own grave. $11 billion, 32 floors of prime Manhattan real estate, a company he had built from a studio apartment and a borrowed laptop, working 18-hour days for 11 years straight, missing funerals and birthdays and every quiet moment that a normal life is made of. He had given everything he had to Cole Industries, his youth, his marriage, his health, 2 friendships that deserved better than they got. And somewhere deep inside all of it, someone was using his name to sign documents he had never seen, moving money through shell companies that traced back to him like a trail of breadcrumbs laid by a very patient and very dangerous enemy. He poured himself a drink he didn't touch and stood at the window for a long time, watching the rain come down on the city below. The skyline glittered back at him, indifferent and beautiful, the way it always did. He had looked at this view 10,000 times and felt bride. Tonight, it just looked like a crime scene.
"I need a janitor's uniform," he said, "size large, and a work ID that'll pass the badge scanner at Cole Industries. Tell the board I'm in Geneva. Tell them anything, I don't care. Just make sure nobody looks for me for 2 weeks." There was a silence on the other end that lasted just long enough to be honest. "Sir, if someone inside the company is building a case against you, going dark could actually. That's exactly why I'm doing it." Marcus watched a raindrop trace a slow line down the glass. "I've trusted the wrong people my whole life, Victor. I've promoted them, protected them, paid them more than they were worth because I mistook performance for loyalty. I want to see what this company actually looks like when nobody thinks I'm watching. I want to see who they really are when the stakes are gone." Another silence. Then quietly, "I'll have the uniform ready by morning."
He walked through the service entrance at 6 in the morning wearing a gray jumpsuit and reading glasses he didn't need, pushing a mop bucket that squeaked on every third wheel rotation like a small, persistent complaint. His name tag said Ray. His shoes were wrong. He'd realized that too late. The Italian leather already on his feet before Victor had thought to mention it. But he kept his head down and his pace slow, and the security guard at the back desk glanced up, said, "Morning, Ray," and went back to his phone without a second thought. Just like that, Marcus Colworth, more than most small countries, recognized on the cover of 3 different magazines in the last year alone, became invisible. He rode the elevator down to the basement and caught his reflection in the polished steel doors. The man looking back at him was nobody. Tired eyes, cheap uniform, the particular posture of someone who had long ago learned not to take up too much space in rooms that weren't built for them. He thought about all the people who moved through this building every single day, wearing exactly that posture, and he felt something uncomfortable move through him that he didn't have a name for yet. He decided that was probably also the point.
The first thing he learned was how much people said when they thought the janitor couldn't hear them. By the end of day 1, he knew that the CFO was billing personal vacations to the company travel account, that 2 board members hadn't shown up to the last 3 internal reviews and nobody was asking why, and that Derek Shaw, his CEO, his most trusted appointment, the man he had personally headhunted from a rival firm and handed the keys to his entire operation, was flying a woman to Miami on the company jet so regularly that the flight crew had started calling her the usual and had stopped logging her on the manifest. He wiped down tables and mopped corridors and emptied bins and listened, and not a single person looked at him once. He was a ghost inside his own empire. On the second day, a woman nearly ran him with a supply cart, came to a sharp stop, and looked at him the way people look at something they're deciding how to handle. Then she reached out and took the mop straight out of his hands without asking a single question about whether that was acceptable.
"You're doing it wrong," she said, with the tone of someone who corrected things not because they enjoyed it, but because incorrectness genuinely offended them on a fundamental level. "You're pushing the dirt, not lifting it. Wrist, not elbow. Pull, don't shove." She demonstrated it with effortless, unhurried authority, moving through the motion like she'd done it 10,000 times and found a kind of quiet pride in doing it well. Then she handed the mop back and looked at him properly for the first time. Her name tag said Lena. She was maybe 29, compact and sharp-eyed, with the particular energy of someone who had been underestimated so many times that had stopped landing. She had a kind of face that was always thinking something more interesting than what the moment called for. "First week?" she asked. "That obvious?" "Soft hands," she said, "and you look at the building like you're seeing it for the first time." She tilted her head slightly. "Most people stop seeing buildings after day 3. You're still looking." She walked away before he could think of anything worth saying to that, and Marcus stood in the corridor with his mop and turned the observation over in his mind for the rest of the morning.
By day 4, Marcus had a complete picture of the 34th floor, and none of it was anything he wanted to see. He'd positioned himself near the glass-walled boardroom during Shaw's morning meetings, keeping his head down and his movements slow, reading lips the way he'd learned to during 3 years of closed-door international negotiations, a skill he had never once expected to use while holding a mop handle. But what he saw through that glass made his stomach go cold and steady, the way it did when a suspicion stopped being a suspicion and settled into fact. Shaw was moving against him. The documents, the forged signatures, the offshore transfers, it wasn't an outside attack or a rogue employee acting alone. It was Derek Shaw, sitting in Marcus's chair, running Marcus's company, and spending 18 months quietly, methodically building the architecture of Marcus's destruction with the patience of a man who had never once doubted the outcome. Marcus watched him command that room, the easy confidence, the practiced charm, the way every person around that table leaned slightly toward him when he spoke, and understood for the first time that he had hired someone who had been watching him from the beginning, learning him, finding every gap in the armor. He went back to mopping. There was nothing else to do yet. The time wasn't right, and he knew it. And he was above everything else, a man who understood timing.
That evening, he sat on a stairwell with a vending machine sandwich that tasted like cardboard wrapped in regret, and Lena appeared and dropped onto the step beside him like they'd been doing this for years. "You look like someone canceled Christmas," she said. He laughed in spite of everything. She had a way of arriving at the center of a thing without bothering with the edges. He had paid consultants $6,000 an hour who couldn't do that. They talked for almost an hour. She told him she'd worked upstairs in data analytics before the restructure wiped out her entire department 2 years ago, that she'd taken the cleaning job the same week she got her termination letter because her mother's medical insurance couldn't lapse for even a single month, that she'd been doing both jobs in her head ever since, the one she was paid for and the one she could see needed doing, mentally cataloging every inefficiency, every
Wasted resource. Every 1,000 small ways this building was leaking value from the inside because nobody with authority was paying close enough attention to what was happening at the bottom. She said all of it without bitterness. That was the part that hit Marcus hardest. Not the unfairness of it, which was enormous, but the complete absence of self-pity.
Day 6, night shift, 10:47 p.m. The building was dark and almost silent, the kind of quiet that only exists in large buildings late at night when the day's machinery has finally stopped and the structure breathes on its own. Marcus was working the executive corridor on the 34th floor, moving slowly, thinking fast, when he noticed the light bleeding under the door of the CEO suite. Shaw's office. Sealed after 10. Always. He stopped. Stood completely still. The door was opened less than an inch, but sound travels in empty corridors, and what came through that gap stopped Marcus Cole where he stood with a mop in his hands and ice spreading slowly through his chest. Shaw's voice was calm. That was the thing Marcus would remember longest afterward. Not the words themselves, but the complete absence of stress in the voice delivering them. The tone of a man reading from a plan that had already succeeded in his mind.
18 months of preparation. Forged authorization codes constructed to be forensically airtight. A shell company paper trail that wound through 4 countries and ended every single time at the same name, Marcus Cole. Federal investigators already quietly briefed, the board vote already arranged, and the votes already counted. Within 30 days, the man who had built Cole Industries from nothing who had slept on a studio apartment floor to make payroll during the first 2 years, who had passed up acquisition offers worth 9 figures because he believed in what he was building. That man would be facing criminal charges for financial crimes he had never heard of until 6 days ago, and Derek Shaw would be standing in the wreckage of it all, smiling for cameras, calling it a necessary correction. "He trusted me with everything," Shaw said. His voice didn't waver. It didn't carry guilt or excitement or the tremor of someone doing something they knew was wrong. It carried nothing at all. Access, authority, his own signature on a blank check. He handed it all over because he wanted to believe in people. That was always his greatest weakness.
Marcus stood in the dark hallway and breathed slowly, the way he learned to breathe in rooms where everything was on the line, and the only useful thing a body could do was stay still and stay sharp. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small personal phone that Victor had given him on day 1, clean, untraceable, registered to no one, and pressed record. He gave it 3 more seconds to capture the room. Then he put his hand flat against the door and pushed it all the way open. Shaw spun around fast. Beside him, a lawyer Marcus recognized from the forged authorization paperwork went completely rigid, the kind of stillness that happens when a body realizes before the mind does that something has gone catastrophically wrong. Shaw's eyes swept the room in a single sharp movement: jumpsuit, mop bucket, name tag, and his brain visibly refused to reconcile what it was seeing with what it knew could not possibly be true.
"This floor is restricted after 10, he said, the automatic authority of a man used to rooms obeying him. And then he actually looked at the eyes. You can change a great deal about a person, a uniform, a posture, a name, but you cannot change the particular way a man looks at a room when he built it, when it belongs to him in a way that goes deeper than ownership, when it is in some fundamental sense an extension of himself." Shaw had looked into those eyes across boardroom tables and negotiation standoffs and quiet dinners where the real deals got made. He knew those eyes. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Ray." Marcus reached up and took off the reading glasses. The silence that followed was the most complete thing Marcus had ever been inside of. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of everything arriving at once. All the weight of 18 months, 6 days, and a lifetime of misplaced trust, landing in a single room with nowhere left to go. "Hello, Derek," he said.
Shaw tried to recover. He always tried. It was his greatest skill, and ultimately his most predictable quality. The reflex of a man who had never once walked into a room without knowing his exit. He straightened his jacket and began to move words around in the precise and practiced way he always did when situations needed managing, his voice finding its footing, the smile assembling itself piece by piece. Marcus let him go for about 4 seconds. Then he held up the phone and played the recording back into the room. Shaw's own voice filled the office. Every word. Every clinical, weightless, perfectly constructed sentence. His own calm certainty about his own victory, in his own voice, in his own office, 6 days before it was supposed to happen. When it ended, the smile was gone completely. "There are 2 federal agents in the lobby," Marcus said. "They've been waiting for my call for 6 days. I'll let them up now." He glanced toward the lawyer, who had been edging silently toward the door with the careful lateral movement of someone hoping not to be noticed. "I really wouldn't," Marcus said, without looking at him directly. The man stopped, as if he'd walked into a wall. Shaw stared at him. For the first time in perhaps his entire life, the machinery behind his eyes had nothing left to process. When he spoke again, the performance was entirely gone, and what was underneath it wasn't sophisticated or impressive. It was just small. 6 days, Marcus. You mopped floors in your own building for 6 days. "I mopped floors to find out what was real," Marcus said.
This was just what I found. He made the call.
They walked Shaw through the lobby 11 minutes later, one federal agent on either side, and the man kept his chin up all the way to the door with the last reserves of a pride that no longer had anything to stand on. The lobby staff watched in frozen silence. Outside, the city moved past the glass in its usual indifferent rush, cabs and pedestrians and the ordinary machinery of a Thursday night that had no idea what had just shifted inside this building. Lena was near the service elevator with her cart, watching everything with the same expression she wore when she was doing math in her head. When Marcus crossed the lobby toward her, she looked at him the way she'd looked at him on day 2, like a woman who had already finished the equation and was simply waiting, without any particular urgency, for everyone else to catch up. "Ray," she said, "my name is Marcus Cole. I know who you are." He stopped walking, looked at her. "You knew?"
Day 2, she let it sit for a beat. "Your shoes. Janitors don't wear $900 Italian leather, Marcus. And the way you looked at the building that first morning," she shook her head slightly. "That's not how someone looks at a job. That's how someone looks at something they own." He stood there in the gray jumpsuit with the name tag still on his chest and laughed, a real one, loose and unguarded, the kind that hadn't had much occasion to exist in his life for a very long time. She had seen through him in 48 hours, said absolutely nothing, corrected his technique, sat with him in a stairwell, spoken to him like a human being, and kept his secret without ever once being asked to. In 20 years of building a company and surrounding himself with the most credentialed and expensive people available, he could not think of a single one of them who had done anything half as quietly decent as that. "I have a board of directors, a legal team, 3 executive assistants, and a security detail," he said. "Not one of them taught me anything useful in 6 days." She almost smiled. To be fair, most of them probably weren't fixing your mop grip.
A week later, she sat across from him on the 40th floor, Manhattan burning gold behind him in the late afternoon light, and he offered her a role that hadn't existed before because it had never occurred to him to create it. Head of Internal Culture and Operations, built from scratch with full authority and no board interference, and a mandate to fix whatever she found. She was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone who takes things seriously enough to think before they agree to them. Then she told him that the first thing she would do was conduct a full audit of every support staff contract in the building. Cleaning, maintenance, security, the entire invisible infrastructure that kept the place running, and that she wanted complete transparency on what those people were being paid and what they'd been promised, and how far those two things were from matching each other.
She told him the janitorial team would receive a 30% raise, effective immediately. Not at the end of the quarter, not pending a review, immediately. Because they had been holding up this entire operation on their backs in the dark for years, and the least this company could do was acknowledge that it had noticed. She told him she would need his word, not a memo, not a policy document, his word, personally, that the people who kept this building running would never again be invisible to the people who ran it. Marcus agreed to all of it without negotiating a single point, which was something he had not done in a business context in over a decade. She reached across the desk and shook his hand with the firm, unhurried confidence of someone who had always known their own worth, even when no one else in the room did. "Deal," she said. Then, with the quietest edge of a smile, "Ray."
He thought about that word for a long time afterward. Ray. A nothing name. A placeholder. A name chosen in 60 seconds because it was plain enough to disappear into. But she had said it like it meant something. Not the name, the person behind it. The man in the gray jumpsuit eating bad sandwiches on a stairwell, who didn't know how to mop and had soft hands, and looked at a building like he was seeing it for the first time. She had met that man and decided he was worth something before she knew what he owned. That was the entire thing. That was the thing he had spent 20 years and $11 billion trying to find. In conference rooms and charity galas and business class cabins crossing the Atlantic,
surrounding himself with people who needed him, people who flattered him, people who smiled at precisely the right moments and said precisely the right things in precisely the right rooms. And he had mistaken all of it, every last bit of it, for something real. It had taken 6 days, a great jumpsuit, and a woman who corrected his technique before she asked his name. He thought that might have been worth more than all of it. He was almost certain it was the only thing that ever had been.
Downstairs, the night cleaning crew was finishing their shift, in the quiet, unhurried way they always did, moving through the building's empty corridors with the calm authority of people who knew every corner of a place that had never once thought to learn their names. They would be gone before the morning shift arrived through the front doors, invisible as always, carrying everything they knew about this place home with them into the dark. That was going to change now. Marcus stood at the window of the 40th floor and watched the city wake up below him. And for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be.